Welcome to Clinical Conversations. I'm Joe Elia. This time we talk about diagnosis, specifically about a book on diagnosis that hasn't been written yet. Our guest, Dr. Danielle Ofri, is writing that book, and she's looking for nominations for great diagnosticians. Dr. Ofri is herself an internist at Bellevue Hospital in Lower Manhattan. She edits the Bellevue Literary Review and is the author of, among other things, Intensive Care, a collection of her shorter writings, and Singular Intimacies, Becoming a Doctor at Bellevue. We last spoke with Danielle in 2009, just after the publication of Singular Intimacies. Welcome back, Dr. Ofri.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Well, this is a little different, isn't it? We're talking about a book that hasn't been written yet. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and why you chose that topic?
Sure. Well, the last book that I wrote, which is called What Doctors Feel, How Emotions Affect the Practice of Medicine, I spent a lot of time interviewing other doctors. And for one part of the book, I was interested in doctors who are friends. So I was searching around the web looking for doctors who might have written about being friends with a patient. And I found a blog post by a doctor on that topic. So I contacted this doctor, and she agreed to be interviewed. And she told me about a long-term patient of hers, a very challenging patient, and how they differed on treatment plans.
Huh.
But they became friends outside the office, and this helped a little bit in their treatment. Then I noticed on the doctor's blog someone writing comments who I could tell was clearly that patient, and she used her real name. So I went back to the doctor and said, would you mind asking the patient if she would be interested in speaking to me? And the patient was. So for my first opportunity, I had to interview a patient who told me a completely different story. It was as if the doctor and patient were in different movies. And although they were both considerate, thoughtful people, trying very hard, they weren't obtuse at all, yet they saw things so differently. Mm-hmm. And that episode ended up not being part of What Doctors Feel, but I thought this would be an interesting nugget to begin a book on what would be loosely titled What Patients Say, What Doctors Hear.
So that's kind of a monster topic, isn't it? It's sort of like, you can imagine a very thick book covering those things. And so you've got that working title. What about diagnosis? Is it diagnosis in particular, or are you thinking more about just communication between doctor and patient?
Well, ultimately, it would be good medical care.
Uh-huh.
Some of which is accurate diagnosis, some of which is good communication. There are many parts of it. So I think what makes the best medical care ultimately for a patient, but what also keeps doctors in good health. And I think, when I think as an internist, most of my interaction with patients is really conversation. Mm-hmm. The physical exam is a small part of our encounter, but most of it is talking. And we like to think we make most of our diagnoses in the history. And I wonder, though, are we as good as we think we are? Am I hearing what the patient's saying? Because the patient is really the primary source data. They are telling us what's going on, and our ability to listen explicitly and accurately depends on our skills, and I think that we're not particularly well trained in that.
So, do you remember? Let's go back to diagnosis. Let's focus on that for a little bit. Do you remember your first correct diagnosis?
Well, I remember one being a resident, mm-hmm. and having a young woman come in with a GI bleed, and we questioned her all and trying to figure out what caused the bleed. We couldn't come up with it. Then the attending came to the bedside and asked the questions a little bit differently. She asked if the patient had any pain, knee pain, headache. Got a yes, and then started asking, well, what did you take for pain? The patient was taking 7 aspirins a day. Uh-huh. So we'd ask, are you taking NSAIDs, aspirin? She didn't say that to us, but the attending approached it differently and got the answer. Huh. And, of course, we were humiliated and couldn't believe it, but, it was there in plain sight. We just didn't elicit it in the right way, or we didn't hear what she was saying.
And what about your first misdiagnosis? Did you take a lesson away from that? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but here we are.
Well, I don't know if it's my first, but one as an attending, I had a woman come into my office, and it was the classic. She opened up a sheet of paper with 30 typewritten questions, and my heart sank. You know, the middle-aged, educated, neurotic white female, you know, me. I'm seeing myself. And, you know, she had everything wrong with her. Everything on the review systems was positive. She had tingling in her gut and shortness of breath, and her hair was itchy, and her, you know, joints ached, and her chest was aching, and everything, her toenails were bothering her. She had a normal physical exam. She had a normal stress test from last year. So I began to ask about stress. And her mother was ill. And her grown son was having trouble. Her boss was giving her hassle. She took up smoking again.
Yeah.
She said, I only get chest pain when I visit my mother in the hospital. You know, that was what it was like. And I said, you know, I think this is all stress. You know, you are having all these symptoms. She was so relieved. I gave her a referral for a psychiatrist. I gave her sleeping pills to help her get better rest. 2 days later, I got a call from the ER. She was admitted with a pulmonary embolus, bilateral. And you know what? Chest pain, shortness of breath were in there. They were just mixed in with 100 other things.
Yeah.
And I was devastated. And this was a scheduled visit. You know, it wasn't a walk-in for having pain. She was coming for a new patient appointment. And did I not hear the correct emphasis? Did I question her incorrectly? But it was there, and I missed it.
Tell us about a great teacher and what she taught you.
One of my very first teacher, in fact, in first year of medical school, Dr. Rebecca Jones, she ran our kind of learning how to interview course where you pick 4 medical students. And because she was a psychiatrist, we went to the Bellevue Psych Ward for most of our patients. And she said, pay attention to what you are feeling, and that will be diagnostic. That will help you with diagnosis.
Huh.
And we, you know, in interviewing patients who were depressed and feeling that, patients who were schizophrenic, patients who were manic, and you could really, if you took your own temperature and thought about it, you would have a real clue to the patient's diagnosis and to their clinical state. It was a fascinating thing.
Do people have diagnostic styles, do you think?
I think there is. I think I think the best attendings that I enjoyed watching were came in seemingly without an agenda, but they had one. But they didn't push it on their patients. They started with the classic open-ended questions, but guided gently. They didn't push the patients in a direction, but tried to shape their questions thoughtfully. But where the person had something else to talk about or a different direction, they would go down that route because often the key was there. And so I really appreciated that guided, open-ended style. Whereas I've seen some doctors come in and just run down the review of systems questions, and they miss things all the time.
So how would you characterize your style?
I try to mop on the guided open-ended, that I always start open-ended. I also make a strong effort, if at all possible, to not write or type for the first minute or two. Really give my eye contact to the patient and body language focus so I can establish a strong connection. Because when I see most doctors today, they're staring at the screen, the patient's looking off in the distance, connection is lost, and I think diagnostic clues, patient trust, patient willingness to reveal is really impacted. I think it's terrible for diagnosis, much less, you know, patient comfort levels. So I make that effort to even give one solid minute, and then I'll say, I don't want to miss what you're saying. Do you mind if I write while you speak? And by acknowledging the computer and making it a tool in the patient's service as opposed to something that's taking me away, I find the patients are more comfortable with that, and that hopefully we've made a little investment in that connection, and they'll still talk to me as freely. The second thing, as I wrote about recently in the Times, was that the physical exam is my second round of interview. I find that the physical exam is the time when we're speaking without technology between us. And conversation changes when you are touching, when you're not staring at a screen, and countless times it is only during the physical exam that a patient says what's really on their mind. I mean, I still find the physical exams helpful and important, not as much as it was 30 years ago, but I still value the physical exam. But I value it even more so as the place to make the connection and to get the critical history, because like all doctors, I really truly feel that the diagnosis is nearly all in the history. And patients will often only talk about things they're ashamed of. They might not talk to you when you're staring at a screen, but when you're touching them and they feel your body contact, they may talk about domestic violence, they may talk about sexual issues, genital lesions, eating disorders, things come up all the time. Or they're reminded about the cough. I'm listening to their lungs. Oh, I've had this cough. Things will come up as you palpate their thyroid. Oh, I had this thing on my neck. So the physical exam is a key part of the history.
Now, you're looking for stories of people about how they learn diagnosis. Are you looking to talk with people who are great diagnosticians in other people's estimation?
Well, I'm looking for a couple of things. One is people who are great listeners, because I want to find out how we learn to listen. My analogy for this is when I turned 40, I took up the cello. I came from piano, and on the piano, on a keyboard, an F sharp is an F sharp. There's no question about it. But on a stringed instrument, you have to find the F sharp. And that's a whole different way of listening. And then my cello teacher asked me in the beginning, which hand is more important, the bow hand on the right or the left hand making the notes? Now I'm thinking, trick question, both hands. He said, neither, it's your ear. And we had to spend the first year or two training my ear to listen in a way that was different than ordinary generic listening. It was an explicit listening in a different way to find the F sharp. You only know when you find it when your ear says, that's an F sharp. And I think we in medicine, we all know how to listen in a conversation, but listening as a physician is a different sort, a very explicit sort of listening, and I think it's a skill that I don't know if we teach it effectively, and so I'm seeking out, one, the truly great listeners, the one who can walk into a room, touch and diagnose neurofibromatosis without even touching the patient. Those kind of diagnosticians. But secondly, I'm interested in doctors and patients who might want to both talk to me, who may have experienced a communication challenge. The patient had something the doctor couldn't understand or figure it out, or a disagreement. I know that might be a tall order, but I would love to be able to talk to a doctor and a patient and see both sides, of the issue.
Okay. Let's assume that there are some people listening to us now who can help you with that. How would they get in touch with you?
My website is danielleofri.com, and there's a contact button. They can email me straight from there.
Okay.
I'd be so appreciative.
Ofri is spelled O-F-R-I, and the website is DanielleOfri.com. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was when you started talking about the cello, I had made a note to myself because I was listening to our interview from 5 years ago, and you mentioned that you were started taking cello lessons, and so I was going to ask you how those were going, and so you're apparently still doing it.
Still at it, and what's been fascinating, and I wrote about this in What Doctors Feel, when I was thinking about what leads to doctor burnout and kind of the mid-career plateau, and one of the things I found when I hit kind of the middle part of my career is that the learning curve, which was so steep as a student and a resident and as a young attending, it was steep and challenging but also exciting, that levels out midway, and I think the loss of that intellectual challenge, that continuously striving to improve, leads to a little bit of an ennui. And for me, about that time, I took up cello, and I was back at the beginning again.
Yeah.
And the same kind of learning curve, both frustrating but exciting. And I didn't realize the plateau in medicine till I came to cello and had that resurgence of the exciting, the striving to get up the mountain. I forgot how rewarding that is, even though it's so hard. And so I'm still climbing that mountain, and each time I think I'm at the top, there's another hill, and there's no top, and there's no end in sight, which is exciting.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much, Danielle, for talking with us today, and I hope that people will get in touch with you and help your book progress.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That was the 172nd edition of Clinical Conversations. The others can be found at podcasts.jwatch.org. We come to you through the NEJM group. We'll see you next time, and if you have any suggestions for interviews or improvements, please contact me at JELIA, at NEJM.org. My executive producers are Kristen Kelly and Adoriano. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for listening.